It looks like no one else is going to join this call. Goodbye. Welcome. Enter the meeting pin followed by the pound key. You have joined the call, but you are the only one here.
Shoot, they just like
Hello, may I ask who joined the line?
This is Janet Crow.
Thank you, Member Crow. We still need a couple more for a quorum, so we'll be in touch with you in a moment here.
7.
Hi, can I ask any members on the line to identify themselves?
I'm Janet Crow.
Thank you, Member Crow. I just wanted to see if anyone else had joined yet.
We were hoping.
You were muted. I have you unmuted now.
Hello, Janet. It's Kim.
Hi, how are you?
We're doing fine. Thank you for calling in.
Hi, can I ask who just joined the line?
Yeah, this is Frank Hendrickson.
Thank you, Dr. Hendrickson. We're still just waiting on one more for a quorum, so it might be a few moments.
All right, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, no worries.
Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Kim?
Yes.
Hi.
Okay.
Let's listen to this newer one.
We are still calling some other members.
Hi, is this Ann?
So we can get this going.
You know, traffic was bad for a little ways
There was
there.
a section of like 19.
You having problems getting on the line?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
all closed off, like police.
Block.
Yeah, there was a shooting and a death at Circle K.
Okay. Delaying somebody.
Hi, can I ask who just joined the line?
This is Frank again. I actually hung up on you there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay.
We had the board switch.
Hi, may I ask who just joined the line?
This is Ann Tebow.
Hi, Member Tebow. Thank you. We do now have a quorum, so I'll turn it over to Kim. Member Peasley.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kellen, can you call the roll, please?
Chairwoman Peasley.
Here.
Member Crow.
Here.
Member Dumler.
Here.
Member Farah.
Here.
Member Garcia.
Here.
Member Hendrickson.
Here.
Member Horn. Member Koperich. Member Litting. Member Spear. Member Tebow.
Here.
Member Vanderway. Member Weber. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Certification Advisory Committee to order at 2:09 p.m. on May 9th, 2018. We're going to start with the Executive Director's report. So, Ketcher, if you could give us an update.
Madam Chair, members, first, thank you for your flexibility on rescheduling this. I know that the last couple of weeks have been pretty crazy, and that there have been higher priorities than this committee. So I appreciate you taking the time to be flexible with your schedules and meeting with us today. And for those on the phone who had some problems calling in, I apologize. I am blaming our transition to Google, so it's not our fault. Blame Google. But we had to start transitioning on our call-in line. So just be aware that if you've been using a call-in line, if you had that saved, just check the calendar invites because those will be updated and new moving forward. So the one update I wanted to give on some of the certification rules that have come through this committee to the board. One was the proficiency assessment rule. If you recall, that this committee recommended, that made a lot of cleanup changes because there are a lot of references to antiquated rule. The board did close rulemaking on that at their April meeting. And then the other rule was that special education teaching certificate rule that this committee had looked at several times. The board also closed rulemaking on that rule at the April meeting. Those were the only two actions at the April meeting. Currently, there's only one other certification rule that is opened, and that is the rule regarding other teaching certificates. You'll probably see that at the June meeting because we'll have to make some changes to comply with statute. There's also some changes in that rule that after having some feedback we'll probably want to revisit. But that'll be for the June meeting. And I will probably say, I mean, right now, having only one certification rule open right now is that's maybe the lowest that we've had in a while. But to help rectify that is the department with a couple changes on our agenda today. So as Bruce looks at me with exacerbation. The other thing I wanted to mention was, unfortunately, Keith could not make it today. I really hope he's not watching live streaming, but he might be. If he is, hello, Keith, we miss you. But he apologizes for not making it, but he'll be back with us soon. So that's all I have for the deputy director's report. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Any questions? Thank you. It's good to see you. Ms. Williams has come. Would you like to come up? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being here and joining us at the table. Our next item on the agenda is the call to the public. So this is the time for the public to comment. Members of the committee may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. I don't see any public. So we will go on then to item number 3. Presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the proposed amendments to the following regarding the definitions and certificate. And we'll start with A, R72601 regarding definitions. We've seen this before, but I think we've also had some new information come forward. So let's go. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, so one other thing I did want to note, you'll notice for those in the room, we don't have hard copies. We're just using Assembly, all electronic right now. So I do want to make sure that the committee is aware that in addition to those executive summaries that we normally see, there are attachments oftentimes at the very end of those. If you scroll down under the supporting documents. For 3A, it's the rule itself, which we've already opened up over here. And then on 3B, we have 2 additional documents. So I just want to make sure that the committee was aware of that. So for 3A, as Member Peasley had mentioned, as Chair Peasley had mentioned, this is an item that the committee has seen. Will be the 3rd time that the committee has seen this. There are a few changes in here, some of them technical, and ADE went over the reasons for those, and they're sort of summarized in this executive summary. There is one additional item that I wanted to bring up that the committee did not see at the last meeting, and that is this definition of teaching experience on the bottom of the first page of that rule. And again, this is R7-2-601. There was legislation passed and signed this legislative session, and we've talked about it before, that modifies the definition of this substitute teaching and what constitutes full-time teaching experience when those individuals try to apply for a standard teaching certificate. And the legislation specifically says that individuals who are applying for a standard teaching certificate can use the hours that they demonstrated primary teaching responsibility towards the capstone experience of the standard teaching certificate requirement. And so what we've done here as part of this definition is an effort to simply conform to that legislation. And so right now, as you can see, existing rule states that substitute teaching is not considered full-time teaching experience, which is why those hours don't count towards the capstone experience when those folks go to apply for a standard cert. What we've done is added in blue just a simple exception that says, except for when they're applying for their standard teaching certificate, they can use that teaching experience to count toward the capstone experience. Otherwise, everything else is status quo. And so that'll conform to House Bill 2036, which was signed into law. With that, I think there is probably additional discussion on 3B because that had some more work done by the department. But unless there are additional questions on the definitions, or if the department wants to add anything from our discussions at the last meeting, I'm happy, or the department I'm sure is happy to answer questions.
Any questions? I know the one question I had was understanding the blue underlined and the yellow highlighted. We've got the explanation of the blue highlighted line, and I think maybe just for the sake of committee members and those online, if we could have that explanation again of why some are underlined and why some are yellow.
Yes, Madam Chair, members. So the reason that we have three different colorations here is because this being the third time that the committee's seen it, we're trying to mark the differences. So the simply blue underlined is what we saw the first time. The highlighted are the additions that we saw at the last committee meeting, the yellow highlighted, and then the blue highlighted is what we've seen since the last committee meeting. So we're just trying to track everything we see. And then, of course, when this goes to the board as part of a recommendation, those highlights and stuff will come off because it's just one package.
Thank you very much for the explanation. It looks really clear to me. I was comfortable with the definitions from our last meeting, and I think it was just serendipitous that it worked out that we didn't act on it at the last meeting because of the change now with the substitute experience, some of it being able to count as the capstone. So we're able to capture that. That sentence makes sense, line 29 and 30 to me. How about any feedback from committee members? Any questions?
I think these are all really good changes. I mean, they are really clear.
And track nicely with the document we're going to be looking at next. So, on folks on the line, members on the line, is there anybody that has any questions or comments? Hearing no other comments, then I'm going to call for a motion to send up to the State Board of Education the changes, the recommendations for definitions to R72601. Is there a motion?
So moved.
By Carolyn. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Farah. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing motion is carried. That takes care of that one. Let's go on to our next item. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, the next item on the agenda is for R7-2-607, which is the general certification provisions, which is sort of our big catch-all rule for certification. As you recall from the last meeting, the department explained some of the rationale behind this. Again, it's captured in the executive summary when, just to sort of summarize as briefly as I can, when there was the switch from NCLB to ESSA, The state rule had relied on NCLB's definitions for many of this, for much of the appropriately certified and approved areas. When NCLB went away, in many cases, the board rule did not fill in those gaps. And so, generally speaking, that's what the intent of a lot of 607 is trying to do, is to fill in those gaps on who's appropriately certified and what approved areas are necessary. And as we mentioned last time, and I want to reiterate here again, and we'll probably do it going forward, it's our understanding that these will be mostly administrative changes in terms of how the rule is structured and how certification desk looks and has backup for what they need to do. But it'll be status quo in terms of who qualifies or does not qualify for approved areas or certificates. These are not additional burdens. They're not less burdens. It's the same in terms of qualifications. It's simply how we get there that we need a little more backing and rule, because some of that stuff that used to be in NCLB is obviously no longer there. There are two documents at the end of that executive summary. One, the rule itself, 607, and this one did not have any additional changes from when the committee saw it at the last meeting, so there's no make some updates to their certification guidance document. And so with that, I'll hand it over to the department to talk about that guidance document and also any other things that they want to chat about on this rule.
Chairwoman, yeah, oh, wow, that's loud. Chairwoman Peasley, members of the board. First, a little background. As Catcher stated, with NCLB going away, we were left with our own board rule, which relied upon NCLB, and it really didn't define approved areas. There was no list of what approved areas we would issue and not issue, which just caused a lot of confusion, a little bit of being nebulous as to what we would add and would add. Can you teach anything in K-12 with certain degrees, and should we add that approved area? And that was just kind of left to the wind. So the rule changed. The definitions that are added, as well as pointing to this guidance document, are an attempt to give a specific list of approved areas. Other states have lists like this, and it makes it very easy for the LEAs, the schools, and applicants to see what they want to teach and see what they would need to get to be able to teach that. It would help with communication, again, with the LEAs and applicants. The document incorporates the definition, and as Catcher said as well, it represents current practice. But we did go and look at the student course connection, which is how the schools report what courses they teach. And we aligned the titles to that, which have a little bit of alignment to the feds too. But so we're not making up our own definitions. We're looking at what's being taught and how they're categorized. We always struggle with, we get a new foreign language at the counter. Do we add that or do we not add that? And to some point, in the back of the approved area document, one of the last pages is the whole list of all the approved areas that are in here, and many foreign languages are there. But we noticed that in the course catalog, and the feds do at some point stop adding every language and group them by Romance languages and East Asian languages and those type of things. We get degrees at the counter such as Middle Eastern studies. Where does that go? Is that a world study? Is that what type of social study is that? And so you'll see some clarification there with some groupings, which I think will aid applicants at the window qualifying, as well as communication to the LEAs. So this is a draft, and I'll tell you what we've already done. Hopefully you viewed the earlier one. You'll see some revisions. We've already met with K-12 standards folks as well as Title II folks. Our intentions is after this meeting to meet with the health and PE, arts, exceptional student services, early childhood, and then as well as maybe even roll this out to other the field members districts and get input, make a final draft and bring that back to the CAC in June. The changes from the first document that you had probably uploaded to what's online for you today really centered around some of those fuzzy areas that we all have to deal with, which is middle grade social studies and middle grade science, and what approved area can teach that and not teach that. And we really met with K-12 standards and looked at how the standards, what people need to be prepared for professionally to address the standards that are taught in middle grades. And so you'll see the middle grade test would be required, but we also open the door to our middle grades approved area, social studies approved area. We also open the door to history approved area because a preponderance of history is taught in the middle grades, social studies. As well as we clarified the science there as well. When you get up to the 6 through 12, the 9 through 12,
could you give us page numbers?
Sure.
Would you mind? Is that possible?
Yeah, so I'll slow down for my overview.
Thank you.
So the document it starts all the way down with preschool through grade 4, self-contained classroom. And we really address the need of the differences there because of the early childhood overlap with elementary cert. That's why it's broken down that way rather than a K-8 block. We're showing the different options between the early childhood cert and endorsement as well as the elementary. And then we get, and that was around page 4 and 5.
Right, yeah, thank you, because that answered a question why I wondered why grade 4 was separated. Yeah. And that's because of the early childhood.
Yeah, we have many overlapping certificates and endorsements come into play. So that's why you don't see the very common breakdown of just preschool, K-8, and secondary. We have to break these down because of the options that people can employ in certification. If you go to page 10 is where grades 5 through 8 start, and it starts with the self-contained classroom, which would be kind of a typical elementary school teacher teaching all the subjects, and then it goes to, on page 11, 5 through 8 single subject classroom, because many schools and districts are departmentalizing there. And with board rule, I'm talking about grade 6 and up, if you're teaching a single content area, you need to have an approved area. That's why the breakdown happens there. It jumps down to 5th grade because there is a middle school endorsement that drops down to 5th grade, as well as we've just added the middle grade certificate, which is grades 5 through 9. And so that's why it doesn't fit nicely, but the options are there. And you'll see, for instance, on page 11, we have art grade 5, and then we have art grades 6 through 8 because of how the certificates and the options lay out. And we do that for each approved area, our primary teaching assignment, if we've got them all and copied and pasted that correctly. If you skip forward, page 16 is just a brief summary of the career and technical ed certificate. So I know we have another guidance document on that, so we didn't feel we needed to spell out much more than their area. We already have a document that really goes into the weeds of all those different areas in the CTE areas that they can teach with the certificates. And then we also have the area.
I'm sorry, excuse me. So does that link there on page 16 take the reader to the guideline for the CTE? I didn't do it yet.
It doesn't point to that guideline document yet, but we can make it do that. It points to the CTE program webpage.
Got
at
it.
this point. And then a little block there on page 16, which is the 9 through 12 self-contained classroom. This is there for those special education teachers. We have that in special ed, the block that's later. This takes care of some folks have those classrooms where one teacher is teaching a group of kids in various content areas, a la credit recovery. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, if that's their full-time teaching load, what do they have to have? And it depends on who you ask right now. It could be, they need to have one of those areas. I guess just pick one. Or do they have to have all of those areas back in NCLB days? Mm-hmm. And so this attempts to define that, if that fits the primary teaching assignment of that teacher.
So could you talk me then through this? No, that's a single subject classroom. Where is that we have the grades 9 through 12, the single subject.
Page 16, the second block on the page.
Oh, I'm sorry. It jumped.
Here's this jumping.
There it is. It jumped. Okay. Yeah, I apologize.
So, those folks would have to have an approved area on their certificate because that's how you qualify for the certificate. But if they're truly in a self-contained classroom, it's not important specifically what area it is because there's just so many different content areas happening.
That's a great clarification. I'm so glad to see that. Because it also applies to many of our alternative programs.
Correct.
As well.
Right.
They are in that same category.
So the next page, page 17, starts the typical, probably high school delivery format, grades 9 through 12, single subject classroom. And so it attempts to take the teaching assignments in the left-hand column and then shows the options, what would be needed to teach. If your primary teaching assignment was art grade 9, then on the right-hand column are all the different ways you could combine your qualifications to get a certificate and be considered appropriately certified. And so that keeps going down through the list. Some things to note. Communication arts and speech and debate, I think we're a little fuzzy. We did talk to our ELA friends, and they suggested removing communication arts and leaving that with speech and debate, but adding, and we did on the new version that's in your packet, that was updated. I think it's newspaper and journalism, or communications, and that would include the newspaper and journalism. It's kind of hard to where do you stick that, and what do you need to be qualified? I think we called it ELA journalism is what we called it. That was a suggestion from them.
I see that on page 20.
Yeah. Foreign language we had originally had on the document. The suggestion was that the standards changed to call it world language now. We attempt to clarify some of the math, different options.
Okay, this might be a silly question.
Sure.
But I remember a few months ago, we've gone through all the different certificates, right? Are they all included in here? Because I remember some of the alternative paths, but it all leads to either a general, secondary, or right? They're not titled. I remember in those they're titled different, but does that have to be included in here as well, or?
It includes all the current certificates that are being issued. I can tell you right what's not in this yet is the classroom-based certificate, as well as the legislation that went through that's going to change the title on some of the certs. We haven't kind of vetted that out yet, but that legislation calling some cert standard and some of them called alternate prep certs. I don't know how that's going to play out. Those wouldn't be on here yet. Okay. The nice thing about this document being a guidance document is that it can be modified quickly, well, rather quickly through the board process, and doesn't have to involve a rule change to incorporate those changes.
So while you brought that up, how will changes and updates be made to the guidance document?
Madam Chair, members, so what will probably happen, at least initially, is similar to what we did with what we're doing with the subject matter expert document, is that the department will propose some changes, and that'll come before the board, and then they'll approve it, usually on a consent agenda, but if something comes up, then of course the board can pull it if need be. So that's probably how it will work initially, at least initially, just so that we, are in the loop on what's going on and we understand what's happening, and especially because it's new, after a while, maybe we can revisit that. But that's probably how it'll happen initially.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairwoman and members, if you look at page 25, the ethnic studies teaching assignment is kind of one of those grouping areas. We haven't had a lot of guidance on how to handle degrees, I have an old page 25, so it'll be close to there if it's not quite there. But it's ethnic studies, and we have people coming up with a variety of degrees and wanting to add an approved area and not knowing exactly what they can teach and not teach. And so this is one of those things we found in the student course connection that makes a lot of sense. And there's a footnote on the bottom of that page that kind of describe the different areas that they could teach, and that also allows the flexibility of the LEA to say, I have this person with this degree, they have the ethnic studies approved area, and here I can offer this class.
Good.
Another one of those areas is global studies. Again, a few months ago, we had a gentleman come to the window with a Middle Eastern Studies degree, and what can I get? I don't know.
Something.
And so now this puts a place for that and allows the LEU to craft and categorize those courses that way and have somebody that's appropriately certified for that.
So did that individual then qualify for a social studies?
I believe what we did is we added an approved area called Middle Eastern Studies. We have no guidance whether to add it or not add it, and that's why this is so desperately needed, is to put those things in the right places and show the path for the folks. And then I'm sure we get the degree and go, I think we can add it. They're qualified under rule. We just don't have that approved area in the books right now, but there is no list, so do we add it? And then I'm sure once we put it on the cert, what happens when they go to the school?
Right.
What are they appropriately certified to teach? It's just kind of nebulous right now.
So, and that goes back to our discussion that we've had in the past. The work of certification division is to determine appropriate certifications and get applicants the certification for which they're qualified, but it falls back on the district to determine what certifications they're going to require for different topics.
Right.
Did somebody on the phone have a question? Catcher.
Madam Chair, members, barring a question on the phone, something that I also wanted to take it back to is that the current rule for approved areas points to the minimum course of study. And we had talked about earlier, and something, not only the change from NCLB to ESSA and sort of how there weren't a lot of definitions in the rule to help fill in the gaps, but because that current rule points to the minimum course of study, anytime we make changes to the minimum course of study, even if it's just including but not limited to list, that has effects on when certification interprets what is eligible for an approved area. And so the fact that those two are so closely linked isn't necessarily good policy for when we try to figure out who's appropriately certified to teach in what. And so that's another reason that having a separate document is probably better practice. So.
This is just beautiful. Just beautiful.
And Chairwoman Peasley, members of the board, if I can just call your attention to a couple more things. Page 31 attempts to define the appropriate certification for special ed self-contained and resource teachers. Birth through grade 12, but that also has implications at the secondary level, because that's always the big question mark. Typically secondary are single subject teachers, yet we have special education teachers that see a group of kids and teach multiple content areas, and maybe are servicing one group of kids for the majority of the day in multiple content areas. And what approved areas do they need? Do they need them all, or do they need one, or do they need none? And so this has already kind of been vetted, but we're going to vet it again. And the determination was made that if they're self-contained, they just need an appropriate certificate. They don't need the approved area. However, on the next page, I believe it's the next page. Well, if they are a teacher, for instance, a mild moderate teacher, may be grouped with all the math students at a high school throughout the day. So we roll all the mild moderate kiddos through that room to receive their Algebra 1 and their geometry. Well, that teacher is teaching math, and so would need the approved area. So this section points that if they are a single subject special education teacher, they need to follow the single subject rules or portion of this document.
Right.
Yeah, that's on page 33. And then page 34 is the appendix, so it basically summarizes all our certificates, so somebody can use this as a guidance document, and we'll add those other ones as they come on board. Appendix B lists all the approved areas that are referenced in the document, so this would be if once approved and accepted, the current list of the approved areas that we issue. And then page 36 is Appendix C, which attempts to clarify endorsements. So a lot of confusion, especially from out-of-state folks, but folks that just really don't specialize in certification all that much. Other states call anything added to a certificate endorsement. We have approved areas and endorsements, and so they cross the two. Also, some endorsements seem to extend the certificate and also show specialization. In other words, they might show that you're a specialist in music, but they extend your certificate pre-K-12. So that if you had a secondary certificate, you could teach music at 4th grade, or if you're an elementary teacher, you could teach music at high school. While some endorsements, like the SEI, although it says K-12, it doesn't expand the certificate to K-12. It shows training in SEI, and you still need to have the correct certificate for the grade level and the group of kids. And so this attempts to, throughout the document, it builds that in, but it also talks about the endorsements here.
Okay. Dr. Demler.
So I can just say this will save me hours and hours because I can point my principals to this document and they can all find it themselves instead of coming to me and saying, this person has this, what can they teach? Or
Right.
this is fabulous. It's wonderful. And it will save a lot of time for both HR folks but also for administrators.
Going to get standing ovations from ASPA on this one.
I know.
No kidding.
Oh, my goodness gracious. This is great. So this is not quite ready for prime time, correct? It's still going to go through some, you still have a couple of groups to take this through. I know I will appreciate being able to take a look at the special education. That's big.
Yes.
There's a lot to go with that. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts? Marisol.
Well, I think the endorsement thing is like, you answered my question by the endorsement explanation, because I was looking at some of the music for middle school, and it says one of the following, a certificate with an approved, and then it says arts education certificate, and then it just says dramatic arts, comma, pre-K-12 endorsement. But in order to get that endorsement, you already needed a certificate, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's right. That was the only thing that struck me when I first read it. It's like, oh, they don't have to have an endorsement. But then when you go to the back to realize you only get the endorsement with a certification.
Correct. Chairwoman Peasley, Member Garcia, absolutely. And I think that's defined as well in the beginning, endorsement. So it's in two places, and that's a layout debate that we'll continue to get feedback on. Otherwise, you kind of have to list all teaching certificates with this endorsement.
Right.
And so, but to get an endorsement, you're correct. You have to have a certificate that is able to take, by the endorsement rule, is able to be placed on that certificate.
Right. How about on the phone to hear from Janet, Ann, or Frank?
I'm having a very difficult time getting into the paperwork, so if you guys say it's okay, then I say it's okay.
Thank you, Janet.
This is Ann. I was able to get into the paperwork, which is surprising with my technological skills, but it's a wonderful document. I'm very impressed. Very impressed.
This truly has been years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that it's been talked about, and looking at it now in black and white, and the glorious, was a 38-page document, is truly a work of art, and so much dedication and knowledge and expertise from your department, Bruce's. Kudos to them and to you and Keith for your leadership in pulling this all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So, we are there on the agenda. There was a request that we recommend the amendment and the certification guidelines to the state board, but the guidelines are not ready yet to go. So it sounds like we would be looking to entertain a motion. Do we want to do them both at the same time? Do we want to split it up and do the general certification provisions, that rule change first, or do we want to do them together?
Madam Chair, members, I think that we would like to get the rule moving at the board level. So I think what we could do is the committee can recommend the rule to the board for adoption. And when that rule comes before the board at the May 21st meeting, we could provide at least a look at where the certification guidance doc is right now, with the understanding that there are still changes to come, but that way that the board members, just like the committee just had today, have an idea of the direction they're going, and that the committee will ultimately, recommend something along these lines. So with that, I think that it would be appropriate for the committee to recommend the rule, and then at the June meeting, hopefully they'll have the guidance doc to be able to officially recommend as well.
That makes sense to me. I like the idea of having them separate because they are going to be separate. And I agree, it's important to get the rule changes going, since that's going to take 2 months before we could think about it closing for rule. But the adoption of the guidance document doesn't necessarily have to take that long. Okay.
Chairwoman Peasley, members of the board, and I think we think it's important to have this in place before the school year begins. We can start to build that consistency,
right,
and not a change in stream once the school year has started.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So to that end, we'll entertain a motion to approve R72607. Rule change regarding general certification provisions to the State Board of Education.
So moved.
So moved by Member Farah. Seconded?
Second.
Second by Member Garcia. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried to move R72607, that rule change, up to the State Board for recommendation for action. Okay.
And
our next item?
yes, Member Peasley, members. Kellen, I'm actually having problems with the mouse. I don't know. Can you move us to the next agenda item? Thank you.
And this is for presentation and discussion regarding proposed enacted legislation affecting teacher certification.
Yes, Madam Chair and members, so the legislative session is now adjourned, and so now we know what we're working with. I will say that a couple of these bills have not actually been signed yet by the governor. We're like right on the cusp of when he needs to take action on them, but just for the sake of our work, because it is a small number, we'll just start working under the assumption that they are going to be signed, so that way we can begin work on them. So one of those bills, House Bill 2036, was the substitute teacher change. The committee just recommended passing that one out, so essentially we can cross that one off our to-do list. But these other three bills here are things that the committee is going to have to take a look at, and we'll have some specific proposals at the June meeting, but we wanted to get this in front of you today. So House Bill 2253 removed the employment length and renewal restrictions on foreign teachers, and it also changed the name of that foreign teacher certificate to international teachers, I believe. So that rule was actually, and I mentioned this at the introduction, is already opened serendipitously, as the chair had mentioned earlier, for a different rule. And so that's something that the committee can take a quicker look at, and we were already recommending some changes to try to reduce the restrictions on that certificate that were not in line with statute. So now it appears that the intent behind those changes in statute to this certificate are to align the length of the certificate with the length of that individual's authorization to work in the United States based on their visa. That, what I had just said, is not specifically mentioned in statute, but it was pretty clearly communicated in some of the explanations that were happening at the legislature. So that's something that we'll take a closer look at when we talk about their length of stay in the United States. Usually those are driven by their visas that they acquire, and my understanding is they're usually around a handful of years. So that's something that the committee will take a closer look at, and like I said, we'll work on some changes for the committee to look at more specifically at the next meeting. House Bill 2520 and also a portion of House Bill 2534, but we'll focus on House Bill 2520, requires 45 classroom hours or 3 college-level credit hours in reading instruction for K-8 certificate applicants. That 45 classroom hour or 3 college credit requirement may sound familiar because we have that current requirement for phonics. House Bill 2520 is a new requirement, so in addition to the phonics requirement, those individuals will also have to get 3 college-level credit hours in reading instruction, including training on evidence-based instructional practices and intervention. So we reached out during the legislative process with the proponents of that bill and explained that if that new requirement went into place in August, when that legislation goes into effect, that would create some issues requiring folks who are just leaving their educator prep program to now have potentially 3 college-level credit hours that they did not receive during their educator prep program. It's our understanding that most of the educator prep programs probably already do something around this, but we're not 100% certain, and we're certainly not certain if they do 3 college-level credits for everybody.
They don't have it for the secondary requirements. Most of them don't. Most of the colleges don't have that. That's where it would fall short. In elementary certification programs, that training is there. Special education may not necessarily be called reading. So that's good that they've agreed to delay. For how long?
Madam Chair and members, we are interpreting it to essentially be the length of an educator prep program. So essentially this requirement will be in place in 4 years. For the individuals who are entering the educator prep programs, they are going to have to start getting their 3 college level credit hours. And that's something that this committee can debate a little bit more fully. That's not something that is officially settled on. If the committee feels like maybe that's too much time, then that's something that we can probably discuss further. But I think the bottom line is that we did get some latitude from the proponents and the sponsor to implement this in a little more deliberative of a fashion, which I think will be helpful, because my understanding is when the phonics requirement went into place, we had a lot of applicants who had to take summer courses to get that at the last second, and that created some unintended consequences. And so we have the latitude to avert that this time around. So the committee can talk about the specifics on the timeline, but that's something that we have.
So you're talking about July 1st, 2022?
Potentially.
Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair. And I do want to. That's the latitude that was provided to the board. So that's something that this committee can go with. But if they feel the educator prep programs and the individuals in those programs can get this requirement done in 2 years, then that's something that the committee can go after as well. The last bill is House Bill 2534. This is the bill that it moved a lot of sections of statute, so it looks like it's doing a lot, but really it's at its core only doing a couple things, but it does clean up statute, which is always nice. But it will require all subject matter experts to obtain a bachelor's degree, and that includes the individuals who are pursuing it under the work experience path right now, as those individuals are not required to have a bachelor's degree pursuant to the statute before this bill and pursuant to our board rule that conform to that statute. Now they will have to have a bachelor's degree, and so we'll have to make sure that that's that requirement is in there for them. The second will also have to require bachelor's degrees for those individuals for adult education certificates. They were not included in the exemptions for a bachelor's degree. So those are some individuals who, I think right now, individuals applying for that certificate have similar pathways where work experience is one of the pathways that they can get. So we'll have to make sure that that requirement's in place for them. And then finally, Bruce mentioned this earlier, the teaching intern certificate was somewhat changed in statute. Its reference to what it's called, and it was now called an alternative teaching certificate, I believe. The difficulty is that later in that same new language, it still calls it a teaching intern certificate. So that's something that the committee may want to look at changing the name to conform to statute. We'll probably work with the sponsor to get clarity on what the intent, if they really want to change the name of that certificate, because like I said, some of the other new language in there still refers to it as a teaching intern. So we brought that issue up during the session, but that was not conformed to. So with that, like I mentioned, we're going to have more specific proposals on each of these at the June CAC meeting for consideration, but I wanted to just sort of provide that information now. And then that last document, that's the LOLA report that has all of these bills with the summaries. Those summaries were not written by me, but by the folks who compile LOLA over at Arizona Capitol reports. So if you feel like there's something inaccurate in there, you can call them, but not me, because I didn't. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And this is information only, so as I mentioned, next time we'll have some action.
Well, they were busy in the legislature this year. These are very interesting changes. So on the change for the teaching intern certificate, is it only a name change maybe that occurred, or was there something of more substance?
Madam Chair, members, no, it was only the name change that occurred for that certificate specifically. Correct. There weren't any other substantive changes to the certificate that that I'm aware of from reading through it at any time during that process. There were some, and just so everyone's aware, there were some changes that were substantive policy changes from when the bill was introduced to when it actually got signed, but it's effectively now status quo for a lot of the folks. Really, I think what ended up happening was when they moved that much statute, sometimes things just got left out. So one of the certificates that had a substantive change before the bill was signed was the emergency substitute certificates. Those individuals were initially not exempted from the bachelor's degree requirement, so they were going to have to require a bachelor's degree to obtain that certificate. However, there was an amendment that was put on right before the bill passed out that exempted them out. So we have received already a lot of questions about were there changes to the substitute certificate, were there changes to the emergency substitute certificate. The answer for both of those is no. Members, we have always operated under the assumption that when new requirements go in for certificates, the folks who have already obtained the certificate under the previous rule and statute are still okay because they obtained those certificates under the statutes and rules that were in place at that time. So that's how my understanding we've always operated when it comes to certification changes. And then conversely, when barriers are reduced for individuals or for certificates, that applies immediately. So new applicants get to take advantage of the reduced requirements for entry, but we wouldn't be able to retroactively reduce the requirements for the individuals who already obtained their certificates. So we wouldn't, Madam Chair, I guess to your point more directly, we would not necessarily need grandfathering language, but we may We have, so for the certification changes last year, we put in for applications beginning August 1, 2018 and forward. We could explore something like that, but I think it's sort of assumed when the board adopts the rule and puts an effective date that barring any sort of retroactivity language, that's when the requirement goes into place and moving forward. So in short, I don't think we need grandfathering.
We need to do that. And then at the counter, you can just, the specialist can just answer the questions right then and there. Okay. Because in years past, we had grandfathering language in there. Grandfatherly language? Grandfathering language?
Old and wise language to help.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. All right. Does anybody else have any questions or any comments? We've already got a good idea of agenda items for next month. Then we can go on to number 5, the future meetings. Our next meeting date is June. Usually 5th. I look, June 5th.
Madam Chair, members, June 5th at 9:30.
So for those of us that are here, is that going to work? Yes. Heads nodding. On the phone, does June 5th work for you?
This is Ann. I'll be in the air. I'm flying back east.
Okay. We'll miss you. Frank?
Hi, this is Frank. Unfortunately, we have admin retreat training that day, so I will not be available.
Janet?
I'm checking my calendar real quick. June 5th. Oh, would help if I were in June.
Good.
Okay, I show it's open.
All right, thank you. Okay, then if there are no other questions, comments, then we will adjourn this meeting of the Certification Advisory Committee at 3:02 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, for making the long trip. Thank you. Dr. Demler, we do appreciate that. And for those of you on the phone, we know that's a challenge to be on the phone, but we really appreciate your effort and your concentration. Thank you, everybody. Safe travels. We'll see you next month.
Too fast.
Everyone else has left the call.
Do that before 8:1.